Kevin Stefanski sat down for an interview recently, and instead of putting the Shedeur Sanders chapter behind him, he reignited the entire conversation. His words were measured, careful, and calculated. He stated, "I have zero ill will. I loved coaching those young players." On the surface, that sounds like closure. But in the NFL world, where every word is analyzed, every pause is scrutinized, and every carefully avoided answer becomes a headline, that statement did the opposite of what it was intended to do. It opened the door wider. The tone was defensive. The framing was evasive. And reporters covering Stefanski's transition to the Atlanta Falcons noticed immediately that questions about his handling of Shedeur Sanders in Cleveland were not going away simply because Stefanski had changed zip codes. Reputation in professional football does not get packed into moving boxes. It travels ahead of you. The central tension here is not complicated. A head coach moved on to a new city, a new team, and a new opportunity. But the decisions he made with a highly scrutinized rookie quarterback in Cleveland followed him straight into his Atlanta press conferences. That is the reality of coaching in the modern NFL, where everything is recorded, every decision is debated on national television, and the locker room culture of one city becomes the conversation piece in another. Stefanski's interview, rather than calming the waters, confirmed to many observers that something significant happened during his time managing Shedeur Sanders, and that the story deserved a closer look. Shedeur Sanders entered the NFL carrying enormous expectations. The son of Deion Sanders, a decorated college career at Colorado, and the kind of pre-draft hype that places a target on a young quarterback before he ever takes a professional snap. When Cleveland selected him, the fanbase and media expected the organization to build around him aggressively, to give him every possible resource to succeed, and to let him grow into the franchise cornerstone that his talent suggested he could become. Instead, what unfolded was a series of rotational decisions, depth chart shifts, and situational play-calling choices that left analysts and fans questioning the organization's commitment to developing its own quarterback. Source: NFL Network Draft Coverage and Cleveland Browns Beat Reporters, 2024 season. National sports media did not ignore this. Debate shows dissected film. Analysts questioned the logic behind certain personnel groupings when Sanders was under center. The optics of how he was being used versus how he should have been used became a regular topic across sports television. The league began paying attention not just to Shedeur's performance but to the environment surrounding him. There is a crucial distinction in the NFL between optics and intention. A coaching staff can have perfectly reasonable explanations for every decision made on a depth chart. But if those decisions consistently create the appearance of a quarterback not being fully supported, the league reacts to the appearance, not the internal reasoning. That is when perception shifts, and it shifted around Stefanski's tenure in Cleveland faster than the organization anticipated. Shedeur Sanders did not respond to any of this publicly. That point deserves to be stated plainly and directly because it matters enormously. While analysts debated his usage, while social media created narratives around his development, and while reporters asked pointed questions about his future with the team, Sanders said nothing that resembled a complaint. He did not criticize his coaching staff. He did not send signals through the media. He did not use his platform as Deion Sanders' son to create pressure on the organization. He worked. He played. He produced. The statistics that came from Shedeur Sanders' meaningful opportunities told a clear story. He demonstrated the ability to lead clutch drives, recorded high-yardage performances in critical moments, and showed the kind of composure in pressure situations that coaches and executives specifically look for in franchise quarterbacks. His Pro Bowl recognition was not a media creation, it was a league acknowledgement that his performance warranted elite-level respect. Compare that to the typical response of a highly drafted rookie quarterback who feels mismanaged. Players have spoken out through agents, through anonymous sources quoted in major publications, through deliberate social media activity, and through outright press conference statements. Shedeur Sanders chose none of those paths. He chose silence and production. In the NFL, that combination builds a particular kind of credibility, not just among fans, but among players, coaches, and executives across the league. Maturity under pressure is one of the rarest qualities in professional sports, and Sanders demonstrated it at precisely the moment it mattered most. Understanding why this controversy continues to follow Stefanski requires understanding how reputation moves through the NFL. This is not a league where information stays private. Players talk to former teammates. Agents share information during contract negotiations. Executives compare notes at league meetings and combine events. A head coach's reputation for developing quarterbacks, or failing to develop them, circulates through those networks continuously. Reputations in professional football stick harder than contracts. A player can be cut, traded, or released, and his performance record travels with him. The same is true for coaches. The way Stefanski handled Shedeur Sanders in Cleveland became part of the professional conversation around him, not as a formal complaint or a grievance, but as information that players and executives in other cities were naturally aware of. Quarterbacks in particular are treated differently in these conversations because the franchise impact of a quarterback decision is unlike any other position in professional sports. When a coach's relationship with his starting quarterback comes into question, every other player in the building watches how it resolves. That observation does not stop when the coach moves to a new team. Inside the Atlanta Falcons locker room, the reaction to Stefanski's arrival has reportedly not been entirely seamless. Veterans on the roster have been described as evaluating their long-term buy-in to the new coaching staff with measured caution. Players like Kyle Pitts, who represents one of the most significant offensive investments the Falcons have made in recent years, have a direct professional interest in coaching stability and offensive philosophy clarity. When a new head coach arrives with an active public controversy surrounding his treatment of a young quarterback, cornerstone players notice. Locker room dynamics in the NFL are fragile. Trust between players and coaches is not established through introductory press conferences. It is built through daily interactions, through transparent communication, and through a coaching staff's visible commitment to the development of every player on the roster. When doubt exists, even when it is based on something that happened in another city, it spreads quickly through a locker room. One veteran asking a pointed question in a film session creates a ripple. That ripple becomes a current. The energy inside a building shifts before any game is even played. Perception alone, without a single documented incident in Atlanta, can alter the chemistry of a roster that the Falcons need to be unified heading into the new season. The David Njoku factor adds another layer to this story. Njoku, the former Cleveland Browns tight end, spent significant time in the same organizational environment where Shedeur Sanders was developing. His departure from Cleveland and the speculation connecting him to Atlanta is not a coincidence that passes without notice. Veterans in the NFL choose their environments deliberately. Players who witnessed a situation firsthand carry credibility that outside analysis simply cannot match. If Njoku ends up in Atlanta, his presence would represent a direct connection between Stefanski's past decisions and his current roster, a dynamic that would be impossible to ignore inside that building. Meanwhile, back in Cleveland, the quarterback situation has remained unsettled in a way that directly contrasts with Shedeur Sanders' demonstrated production. The Browns have been engaged in ongoing discussions around their quarterback depth, with names like Deshaun Watson, Russell Wilson, Malik Willis, and others appearing in media reports as potential options or competition factors. The constant cycle of quarterback competition narratives in Cleveland creates an environment of instability that affects more than just the position itself. When a team's quarterback situation is consistently uncertain, team chemistry suffers across the roster. Offensive linemen cannot fully commit to a protection scheme they do not know will be consistent. Wide receivers cannot build timing and trust with a quarterback who may or may not be starting in 3 weeks. The entire offensive infrastructure becomes conditional. Contrast that with what Shedeur Sanders' production suggested was possible, a foundational quarterback around whom a coherent offensive identity could be built, and the Browns' current situation looks like a self-inflicted wound. The comparison between Shedeur Sanders' development arc and Kevin Stefanski's current public standing reveals something important about leadership decisions in professional sports. Sanders entered adversity as a rookie, faced questions about his usage and organizational support, responded with composure and measurable production, and emerged with his professional reputation stronger than when he entered. Stefanski oversaw a young quarterback's most formative professional year, made decisions that generated significant national scrutiny, and now carries that scrutiny into a new city where he needs immediate credibility. The concept of ego versus development is relevant here. When a young quarterback succeeds, the credit is shared broadly. When the environment around a young quarterback creates barriers to success, the head coach carries a disproportionate share of the accountability. Public support for a developing quarterback is not just a feel-good gesture, it is a strategic investment in a player's confidence, in the team's identity, and in the coach's own legacy. The NFL media landscape magnifies every leadership decision made around quarterbacks specifically because the stakes are franchise-defining. The consequences of how a coach handles an elite young quarterback do not always appear as a formal controversy. They show up in subtle but significant ways. Free agents evaluate environments before signing. Players ask teammates and former colleagues about a coaching staff's culture before committing to long-term deals. Media narratives shape recruiting conversations in ways that are difficult to quantify but impossible to ignore. What Stefanski is experiencing now represents exactly this kind of ripple effect, not a scandal with documented evidence, but a persistent professional question that surfaces in every relevant context. Young quarterbacks entering the league study how the players before them were treated. The NFL has a long memory, and the treatment of Shedeur Sanders during his Cleveland tenure will be referenced by agents advising their clients, by players evaluating destinations, and by analysts covering the league for years. Production eventually overrides politics in professional sports, but the politics leave marks that take significant time and intentional action to address. At this moment, Shedeur Sanders' professional stock is rising on the foundation of documented production and demonstrated composure. Kevin Stefanski is entering a new coaching chapter with a credibility question that his first Atlanta press conference did not answer. The Atlanta Falcons face an immediate test of whether they can establish trust with a veteran roster that is openly evaluating its new coaching staff. And the Cleveland Browns face a clarity decision about their quarterback future that their current public positioning has not resolved. The performance record belongs to Sanders. The narrative question belongs to Stefanski. And the league is watching both situations with the kind of attention that only genuine uncertainty produces. Did Stefanski mishandle Shedeur Sanders in Cleveland? Can the Atlanta Falcons rebuild internal trust before the regular season demands it? Should Cleveland fully commit to a direction at quarterback, or will the cycle of uncertainty continue? Drop your take in the comments below. If you believe Shedeur Sanders proved himself under pressure in Cleveland, smash that like button. Subscribe for deeper NFL breakdowns, insider reporting, and the real stories behind the headlines. This saga is far from over, and we are covering every chapter.